Alright, it took me a little bit to get to episode 3 of Boogiepop, but a lot of people seem to be interested in hearing my takes on the show as it continues and how it compares to the light novel. As I suspected, the third episode went ahead and just covered the entire rest of the book. We completely skipped over Akio's chapter. It's just not happening. Doesn't matter that it's the kind of the heart and soul of the whole fucking book. And we go right into Nitoki Kei's chapter. And like, what bothered me the most about episode 3, amongst many things, is that she is given no characterization at all. It's just like, follow this character as the plot plays out around her, and you're left with the sense of like, why her? Why focus this arc around this character? Why focus this episode around this character if this character seems irrelevant? They don't seem to have anything to do with anything. It's just like a character who happened to be there. But, you know, she's supposed to be the discipline committee president, but the whole irony of her character is that she doesn't actually care about the position. Her personality is that she just has this, like, niggling feeling that she always needs to get involved with everything because she needs to know the answers. She can't just let things lie. She always has to, you know, like, overperform and try to like get to the bottom of things and try to help people. And so even though she doesn't really give a shit about like all the dating happening on campus, for instance, she lets it all slide. She just lets people off the hook. She just wants to know that it's happening, basically. And, you know, everybody regards her as like a big sister, even though she looks like a little girl. And her character design in the anime is really terrible, in my opinion. I mean, if you look at her in the book, she's meant to look like extremely childish and small and have big wide eyes. She's a cutesy little girl because that's the chief irony of her character, is that like everyone thinks they can get something from her because she's small and she seems like a busybody and a pushover. Even though she doesn't like to be identified that way, she just can't help herself. And she's just got this like endless wellspring of good-naturedness, which Boogiepop compliments at the end of the book, telling her that, like, as long as there's people like you, there's hope for humanity. Like, you are the perfect type of person who is just, as a natural state, empathetic and willing to help. You know, unwilling to turn a blind eye to anything. As soon as she knows that there's trouble, she's going to do something about it at expense to herself. And in that way, she is similar to Boogiepop. So none of that characterization comes through at all, in spite of the fact that all the same events happen. It's just that they happen so fast. There's none of the narration, none of the getting into the characters' heads. I mean, this episode is like a fairly big chunk of the book. Let me try to pick out exactly how long it is. You know, I guess it's not. It doesn't look like much when you just look at it this way, but like this is. It's the longest chapter. And so it's just like you have all the events crammed in as tightly as they could possibly be with none of the nuance. And it just makes you feel like you're watching events transpire. It just feels like getting all the characters into one place for whatever reason. You don't really have this natural flow of the logic of why the characters are, you know, misdirecting each other. You know, Masami, like, leading them out of the storeroom because of the fact that he knows that Echoes was sleeping there. So he says specifically, like, nobody's here and there's no signs of anyone having been here, you know, because obviously he knows that people were there. And then he, like, kicks aside some, like, indication of Naoko having been there or whatever. So it's like, you just don't have this impending dread or creepiness that comes from, you know, knowing that character is going to turn on them. And also, I just don't like the way that his character design portrays him, because while the point of his character is that he's like a turbo normie, like, it's all a facade. Like, here's what he looks like in the book. You get a great sense of what this person is supposed to be like from this image. He's somebody who is feigning the ability to fit in, but he doesn't act like a performance artist the way he does in the show, where there's like a massive cognitive dissonance between who he's pretending to be and who he really is. It's more like he's just kind of casually along for the ride. It's more like he's just, yeah, whatever. You know, like, nothing he says or does draws any attention to himself. This portrays him as, like, an openly friendly guy in the anime. Like he's smiley, he's approachable. In the book, it's just that nobody questions his existence. Not so much that he is outright, you know, going out of his way to be a nice guy or anything like that. You kind of get the impression that he minimizes his interactions with people as much as possible, except for how much will convey the idea that he is normal. So I just don't feel like that comes through about his character in the anime. There's a line that they changed that was really odd. I'm looking it up just to be sure that I'm correct about this, because most of the dialogue is exactly the same in the anime as it is in the novel, as far as I can tell. You know, obviously I'm reading a translation, but the weirdest part is that Nito Kike accosts the bad guys by calling them demons. She calls them, like, Akuma. But in the original, and there's a whole translator note about this, she says, Hito de nashi, which means you're not human, essentially. And so it's weird that they would change that line, because, to read this quote from the translations notes, and I know Andrew Cunningham, who is translating the Boogiepop novels, is watching the show and commenting on it, so that's neat. So shout out to him if he happens to come across these videos somehow, but you aren't human, originally Hito de nashi. This bit and the second reference to distortions in the world were by far the two most difficult lines in the book to translate, as it's difficult to try and capture the nuance of a line and still have it sound like something you'd shout at a moment like this. So, you know, he paid special attention to this line, and then in the next part, she talks about how there's a line where she says, like, once they graduate, they could take over the whole world. Like, who knows what the Manticore and Masami will do after they graduate, and he notes, it does say a lot about the book's worldview that Kei can't imagine Saotome Masami and the Manticore taking over the world until after they graduate. You know, that line's missing. Just the whole worldview of the character, the whole way she interprets events, is what makes those events interesting. It's not that, you know, a bunch of fucking supernatural fighting is inherently cool in this case. It's that, you know, the effect it has on the characters and how they are, you know, seeing the situation is interesting. I also just think, like, the directing of this show is so awkward. There's all these scenes where they keep doing this trick where, like, the music's playing along and then it just abruptly cuts and goes somewhere else, and it's just jarring and, like, makes the scenes feel like they ended out of nowhere. It doesn't, like, it doesn't add anything. It's not done in a way that's creepy or cool. It just feels like, oh, that's over? Okay. There's a moment when the Manticore is shot in the head where the music just cuts out, and it's just like, the arrow's just in her head now. And you're like, oh. Okay. And then the music cuts back in, loud, but then immediately has to be crossfaded to be quiet so that the dialogue can continue. And it just sounds mega awkward. It sounds like they weren't approaching the scene with a consideration of, like, how to make it the best. It's like they were thinking, okay, we have to have this event, then this event, so we'll just do that in that order. Here's how much time it takes to portray that. Here's the soundtrack that we're going to use in that scene. We'll make this moment dramatic by cutting out the music and having it come back, but then it's going to have to continue. It's like they didn't think it all the way through. It's like it wasn't planned thoroughly enough. Like they didn't consider the way that this would all feel once it actually was being watched. It's like a very workmanlike approach to directing. I don't really know how to describe this in a more detailed way, because you'd have to kind of show what it should look like. And I just keep thinking about, like, Bakemonogatari and how great of an adaptation that is, because there's no way anybody read the book and pictured what the anime looked like. And I would imagine that, you know, you would have your own vision in your head, and then you'd watch the show and you'd be like, oh my god, that is so much cooler than what I was thinking of. You know, I was just picturing Araragi and Hanekawa, like, sitting down and having a conversation. But in the anime, there's this trick where Araragi's playing with this pen, and he keeps, like, you know, revealing different parts of the other character in the screen, like covering up parts of her with the pen, just, you know, just little things like that that are like enhanced beyond what you were picturing. This feels worse than what I was imagining. It doesn't look as good. Like, echoes going up into a beam of light, it just kind of happens. Like, there's a lot of description of that in the book. And even in the original Boogiepop Phantom anime, that one portrays that event as, like, the inciting incident for the whole story in that show. And it looks great. It's this epic pillar of light coming up from the dark green, you know, aesthetic that the whole show has. Which, by the way, this scene is meant to happen, I think, a little later at night. I mean, school gets out pretty late in Japan, and they were walking around for, like, over an hour. Like, the part where they're in the not gymnasium, but the, what the hell is it called? A, lecture hall, like, when they're all tied up. I think it was described as being, like, pitch black. Or, like, that their eyes had to, like, adjust to, the little bit of light, like, moonlight filtering in. I could be remembering that wrong. But, another thing, in the book, the reason Boogiepop is able to defeat the Manticore so easily is that she is half burned away by the beam of light. In the book, Masami, like, jumps in front of her. I mean, there's a fucking full-page illustration of it. Like, he jumps in front of her to block her. He does not knock her out of the way. He is completely eradicated. She is halfway burned and completely naked after this point, which is depicted in the manga adaptation from the artist of the light novel. And, you know, like, the whole point was that he cuts through her arm so easily because it had already been horribly charred by the beam of light. But then he struggles on the neck. I also just hate the portrayal of Boogiepop's wires in this show. And granted, like, in later books, it will be described in more, like, almost magical terms. But in the first book, you never get the sense that the wires are, like, something that Boogiepop just has free control over. It's like he set them up beforehand, and then, like, people fall into the trap of the wires, you know? So, like, it's just it's a very strange take on it. To see all the events be exactly the events that I remember for the book, just done so much more poorly, you know? I'm trying to think if there's anything else that was missing entirely from the anime. I mean, for the most part, the events that happen are the same events. It's just, like, they don't mean anything. And I really find myself wondering, like, for people who like this show, I don't know what they're getting out of it. I don't really understand what the appeal of it is, because the appeal of the book to me is the worldview. It's the way that the characters think about what's happening. It's the presentation of the idea that, you know, all of this is possible because of how normalcy functions in society. Like, that Nitoki Kei, the reason she gets involved with this is that she is kind of like a very normal person, but one who just sticks her nose in where it doesn't belong, and that inevitably involves her in this narrative. But, like, she doesn't seem any more or less normal than anybody else really in this situation, because we don't know how she thinks or how they think. There's not enough difference between the characters to give each one, like, a distinctive personality. And they also just look way too similar. Everyone's kind of got the same face. I mean, the character designs are much more expressive in the book. You know, Kiri Minagi looks fucking badass in the book. She does not look fucking badass in the anime, you know? Or she looked badass in the original anime as well, which had the actual designer on it. So, yeah, I find myself confused and let down watching the show. I feel like it has no tone. I feel like it has no real personality. I feel like it's a worse version of what I've seen before. The Sakuga action was, like, really floaty and uninteresting. It's impossible to care about the two characters fighting because you have had little establishment with them. The scene where he slits Nagi's neck looked terrible. Why would they show that from a head-on perspective like that? Also, I believe it was implied in the novel that he, like, nicks her up this way. Like, I always imagine that because he cuts her jugular specifically. So, you know, it just looked kind of cheesy and bad. And I don't know why people are enjoying the anime. Like, I would love for people to explain to me what they think the appeal of it is. Because anyone who I've talked to or read comments from who has read the book has said that the anime was a huge disappointment to them. The only people I've seen who say they like the show are people who haven't read the book, and I can't relate because I've obviously read it a lot of times. I also read the follow-ups in the time since then, and like, I wanted to have higher hopes that books 2 and 3 would be more interesting in the anime because they are way more action-centric. There's just way more shit going on. I imagine they'll spend a little more time on some of the events that take place in the story, but at the same time, you know, seeing the action in this episode left me more concerned, if anything. So yeah, that's my take. I hope you enjoyed it.